Hello and welcome to 5-Year Club video number 84, the inflation adjustment scandal. Yesterday I was thinking about the calculation that I used to measure the sales outcomes in the first 10 years of these different cohorts, and I realized that I had not properly discounted the remaining loan amount when I calculated the sale proceeds. Basically, my calculation assumed that the mortgage debt that you start with grows with inflation. And of course, debt does not grow with inflation. If you take out a loan for $100,000 in 5 years, it's still a loan for $100,000. It doesn't magically go up. And this really bummed me out. And I knew I had to correct it. And so I corrected it. And now we're going to go over, do the results change? Hint, they don't change. All right. It's a good time to bring up something I read in the book, Thinking Fast and Slow. It discusses intelligence and, broadly speaking, two different kinds of intelligence, like type 1, which is the quick intuitive thinking, and type 2 is like the deep analytical thinking. But beyond that, it discusses the role of doubting yourself in intelligence, and it discusses that more or less somebody who doubts themselves more often and checks their work, they can be stupider analytically than somebody who just gets it right the first time. But their outcomes end up being the same. And so clearly I'm not the brightest crayon in the box if I'm not getting this inflation stuff right the first time. But I have learned to check my work because I've gotten stuff wrong so many times throughout the years that I've learned I need to be paranoid about my own ability to do things correctly the first time. And so now we're going to look at the fix and just keep moving onward, analyzing what we can know about housing. So this is the original calculation for the Chicago yesterday, and this is the properly inflation-adjusted calculation. And what we're going to see is that in the case of these Chicago properties, the inflation adjustment really helps bring a lot of these people close to zero instead of being more negative. We also see that the inflation adjustment impacts the later years significantly more than it's going to impact the beginning years. So, that's going to be a theme throughout this, is that we're not going to see a lot of change in the first 5 years from inflation, and we will see some change in the next 5 years from inflation, but not all that much. The inflation adjustments are different for every single individual line because, again, this data is describing the experience of the first 10 years of home ownership for about 21, 22 different cohorts starting from 1996. And so, some of these are starting in 1996, and I have to inflation adjust them for 96, 97, 98, 99, 2000. And some of them are starting in the year 2002, and so I have to inflation adjust them for 2003, 2004, 2005, 2006, 2007, that kind of thing. And as a result, when we look at kind of how the lines meet up at the very end, we're going to see a little difference in the spacings there because inflation impacts different cohorts in different ways. If you have really high inflation, then it is going to stomp your debt down in the first 10 years more so. If you have very low inflation, then debt's really not going to make much, if you have low inflation, then the change in the value of the debt is not going to make much of a difference by the end of that first 10 years. So that was the Chicago outcome. We get it turned upward, and then here is the Lilburn outcome. This is the first wrong one, and this is the fixed one, and there's actually not as much difference. Certainly people at the end are helped a bit, but so it looks like the worst person at the end here is at about negative 20,000, whereas the worst person here is something more like negative 28,000. So sure, it definitely makes some difference, but it's not life-changing for the people at year 5. They're still underwater, and they still can't sell their property unless they add money to it. And San Jose, similar story. The original wrong calculation had a bunch of people underwater. The fixed calculation, people are still underwater. They're less underwater, but they're still definitely there's still a very wide range of outcomes, and a bunch of people are still underwater, which was my point with this whole thing. In the first 10 years of home ownership, people model it as if it's 20% down, and then you make your payments, and it's just only going to go up from 20%. So of course, you're going to have some flexibility to take that 6% hit in year 5 and sell your property, and that's clearly not always true. And it's definitely also not always true when the realtors were telling people in 2006 that home prices were trending upward, and therefore you could always just refinance at the end of like a 5-year balloon payment to a fixed, and you would do better by working the deal that way because you would have more equity at that point, so you could get rid of your PMI because, of course, those people put less than 20% down, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, point is, first 10 years of home ownership, more risky. Beyond 10 years, though, the inflation really does start to make a more considerable difference. So this is Lilburn's spreadsheet with the incorrect inflation adjustment. And we can see there's a big old fat patch of red here. And this is, again, where the value they would get from selling is less than their down payment. Inflation shrinks that significantly. And here we have the Chicago data, and we only have a little bit of green right here, only have a little bit of green right there. And in Chicago's case, this shrinks a little bit, but actually what ends up happening is that these cohorts, they get more positive outcomes because of inflation. So we get increases in good outcomes, decreases in negative outcomes. Okay, that's what we would expect. And then finally, in the case of San Jose, it's going to be a similar story. You see the green areas kind of puff up and expand. You're going to see the red areas contract a little bit. It's not going to matter that much for people near the beginning of their mortgage experience. They're still going to be underwater at points because those real estate boom bust cycles matter more than inflation, especially in the first part of it. And the reason why is because this is the inflation curve I'm working with. This is the one from 1996 onward. And so you're really, you divide the remaining mortgage balance that you have to pay off by whatever this number is for that given year. And it's 1 in the beginning, so you're really not getting a different result at all. And it's only like, 1.02, 1.04, 1.05.5, or 1.055. Anyway, yeah. In the beginning, these values are so small in those first 5 years that they're really just not going to be able to move the needle much in terms of getting you out of being underwater, because the prices have moved at this point by 50%, 40%, whatever they were. And that's just going to crush, the sub 10% percentages that you're getting on this inflation adjustment. All right, lessons from this is that calculations on this stuff are hard, and I have made a mistake, and I've fixed it, and I'm definitely going to make more mistakes in the future, and I'm definitely going to fix them in the future. And it's going to be important for me to review my stuff, and I wish I had, people to bounce this off of beforehand, but I don't. So I can expect them, and we're going to fix whatever goes wrong, and we're going to be honest about it, and then we're all going to learn, make sure you inflation adjust your debt when you are doing this kind of mortgage or, housing outcome calculation. And again, my final point showing this data is that the first 10 years of home ownership have risk, and we need to pay attention to that risk when we purchase a home so that we are properly putting all of our financial firepower into the baskets that we think are going to get us what we want in the long run. I wanted to show you this. This is the inflation-adjusted Case-Shiller Index of home value, or whatever the full name is. I don't know. The point is, this is the value of homes inflation-adjusted since 1900, since 1890, I think, is when it starts. And the reason why I wanted to show it to you is because even though that 2008 drop from here to here was a big drop, and we are coming back up now, what we've seen now is we've seen one huge price movement, another huge price movement, a third huge price movement. And in the past, we've seen smaller price movements, but the point is we have seen fluctuations in price movements in the past. The Case-Shiller index is not a gradual, lazy river upward slope. This is the data for the past, say over 100 years. And we should expect more volatility in the future. Experts did not predict this fall. If they had, then 2008 wouldn't have been such a surprise. But I also wanted to read you this article because I want people to know that I'm not against somebody buying a home right now. I'm against somebody buying a home right now not having looked at this data and not being aware of the full range of situations they may be in the next 10 years and not preparing for that full range of situations. This is an article with someone saying that housing is not repeating the bubble period. So they are referring to this latest uptrend in housing, this latest dramatic rise in prices. And I am not going to bother reading the article. I'm just going to skip to something near the end where we discuss kind of some of the reasons why they believe that this is not a bubble. For the last 19 months, either Seattle or Portland was the city with the fastest rising home prices based on 12-month gains, Blitzer said. Since the national index bottomed in February 2012, San Francisco has the largest gain. Using Census Bureau data for 2011 to 2015, it is possible to compare these three cities to national averages. The proportion of owner-occupied homes is lower than the national average in all three cities, with San Francisco being the lowest at 36%, Seattle at 46%, and Portland at 52%. He said nationally the figure is 64%. The key factor for the rise in home prices is population growth from 2010 to 2016. The national increase is 4.7%, but for these cities, it is 8.2% in San Francisco, 9.6% in Portland, and 15.7% in Seattle. A larger population combined with more people working leads to higher home prices. And that's different than a bubble. When you have more people who need housing, and it's not simply an increased availability and credit across the board, then you have higher housing demand and prices go up. And so, yeah. I'm not saying you should not buy a home right now. But I am saying that this article I just read, this may or may not hold up. The stuff that they were saying in 2008 happened to not hold up, but it also might hold up. It might work. This gain after 2008, we're coming back to that gain. So we've also had really easy credit. So my point is that I don't think that people know what's going to happen. But I do think that there's a wide range of outcomes. And I think that historically speaking, if you are buying in a neighborhood after there has recently been a large gain, 30%, 40%, 60%, whatever it is, there are good reasons to believe that at least part of that gain are due to, say, increased credit availability. And as the Fed raises rates, it's possible that the declining availability of credit will have a negative impact of your home price. And it may not be dramatic enough to put you below, put you down here, but it definitely might hurt your ability to achieve these higher outcomes and put you somewhere here in the middle. So just be aware of that. Yep, that's it. Thank you for watching 5-Year Club video number 84, The Risks of Inflation Adjusting with Lewis. And I hope you enjoyed it. Have a great day.